work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it, work for it, ride for it, I'ma organize for it, stay up in the night and in the morning, I'ma rise for it, heart for it, mind for it, ears for it, eyes for it, peace and a place on this earth for me and mine for it.
Hey, peace. Thanks for tuning in to the Money, Power, Land Solidarity podcast. I am really excited today to have a special guest joining us. We're continuing our coverage of the 2021 municipal elections, and I think we have the most exciting, dynamic, explosive candidate in the race this year. We're joined by Robin Wonsley. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I wish I could be introduced like that all the time.
Hey, for a small fee, I'll follow you around.
I got you, Jay.
Cool. Well, I wanted to hop right into it. And first, could you start just by introducing yourself to our listeners and help us understand how did you become poised to be the first Black Democratic Socialist to be elected in the city of Minneapolis? What experiences and values politicized you?
I think life, growing up as a Black person and predominantly Black working class Southside Chicago, and experiencing some of the same dynamics that we have here of growing up in one of the most racially segregated cities, experiencing some of the grossest disparities when it comes to like having to constantly attend public schools that were heavily underfunded, constantly having loved ones and neighbors cycle in and out of our prison system, having lots of loved ones have to hustle and do side businesses because it was hard to come across like decent jobs or livable wage jobs. And all of this happening in a blue, like true blue city, like liberal representation, up, down, like top down. Like it made no sense to me of like, how can we have this quote unquote liberal representation, but for Black folks have some of these a very different experience of like literally living in an apartheid city.
Yeah.
And then having those experiences like really birthed my activism when I came to college and specifically Carleton College here in Minneapolis. And at that time we had two major social movements that birthed during my college journey, Occupy Wall Street and the Black Lives Matter movement that really shaped, I think, many folks like me, millennials at that time.
We must be about the same age. I'm 35.
I'm about to turn 30 in 2 weeks.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like millennials are like, wait, what's happening? And again, under predominantly Democratic leadership, we had the first Black president from my own city. You know, Democrats were in charge, but yeah, Black people are still getting shot left and right by police. Income and wealth inequalities are still widening amongst working class people. And people were feeling the shock of like one of the worst, recessions in 2005, housing crash, many of the crises that we're experiencing now. And as we talked about, like really politicize people, to
absolutely.
Get out in the streets, to call out like the capitalist class, but to also make connections to like how racism is inherent to protecting a system of capitalism, which requires police officers to heavily police Black and brown and indigenous communities and shoot them left and right and police them. So I think all those experiences living in a system of racial capitalism, but also seeing what was necessary to get concessions, to get change.
Hell yeah.
And that was through struggle, collective struggle, independent struggle, more specifically. And that became even more clear when I moved here in Minneapolis with, within a year of being here, Jamar Clark being killed, and Black Lives Matter really forming at that time, and doing like independent actions, like having the occupation now at the 4th precinct and seeing the Democratic establishment come hard at them for that.
Yeah.
And then also seeing this growing workers' rights movement that was demanding earned sick and safe time, livable wages so that we can actually have stable lives in this city. Seeing that same liberal Democratic establishment go hard against workers and say, no, you don't deserve a $30,000 annual income. And sorry, we can't do anything about the police in your communities hurting you. And what actually pushed back against those dynamics was that sustained struggle, that sustained direct action amongst multi-class coalitions, multiracial coalitions, working class people being in the street, calling out the corporate forces, the power brokers that, play puppeteers behind our city council members and the mayor, like calling that out and literally forcing a public political fight for these concessions. to me, that's what's necessary in this very contentious moment that we're in. We need independent grassroots leaders who are not going to shy away from these issues and make sure that we're building working class consciousness and power to drive the changes that we know are necessary forward.
Hell yeah. That's really inspiring to hear. You said the word independent a couple times, and I think what's really important is for us to understand. I want to talk to you about the word socialist. It's so exciting that you claim that you're a socialist and you wear that proudly as a badge of honor, And I think what you're describing there is that socialism is not just a set of policies, but it's also an orientation to struggle. And it's a real understanding that we have to take action against the system. We have to take revolutionary action. We have to break the rules of the system. We have to work as a class collectively to struggle. So I just want to affirm that it means more than just, wanting public housing. It means more than workers' rights. And those things are beautiful and good. It's also a working class orientation that has urgency behind it and understands that we have to take power. We can't play by the rules of the system. So salute to you. And you said that word independent a couple times. And one of the reasons why I am really excited about your campaign is you chose not to have a dual endorsement. So there's 4 candidates that are endorsed by the DSA, and I think that's great, and I'm rooting for all of those candidates. You're the only candidate who doesn't have a dual endorsement with the DFL, and I found that really, really important. So could you just talk about that decision a little bit? You just talked about your experience with the Democratic establishment, but just say more on that. Why did you choose to not pursue a DFL endorsement and stand proud on a DSA endorsement?
I think for me, the very experiences that I named of growing up in largely democratically governed cities, a nation, literally for most of my life, it's been Democrats that's been in control, and still experiencing these gross manifestations of inequalities. And nothing getting better. They do a good job of paying lip service, and then we'll sign deals with corporate developers and the banks to give them the funds. They'll, sign contracts with prisons in a heartbeat. And for me, and I think a wake-up call for a lot of us was with the Bernie Sanders campaign, where not only did we see, also someone run openly as a socialist as a presidential level, but you also got to see how the Democratic establishment orientates itself. Time and time again. You literally have someone also running on a platform that inherently supports your base. Your working class people is supposed to be the base of Democrats. And literally you have a presidential candidate who's saying we can provide universal housing. We can make sure we have a Green New Deal that creates green jobs. Like, we literally can have a socioeconomic infrastructure that upholds our collective well-being. And you will rather do more to pour political capital and millions of dollars of resources to fight that than the conservative right-wing forces that's been growing. And for me, as someone who also comes out of a tradition, like as a Black person through abolitionist politics, this is the opportunity for, I think, working class people to sever those connections with institutions that do not serve our interests or advance them, especially in this moment. It's like, I have no time when cops are killing my people, folks are getting evicted and displaced from their communities because rent is too damn high, to be having to fight my own party.
Thank you. I love to hear it. I really love to hear it. I couldn't agree more. I feel like at some level we have to stand on our values and what we see as real and refuse to be abused. It's like the Democrats are not for us. The Democrats are a party of the capitalist class. And even if that means short term, maybe you don't have access to some of the resources, I feel like long term it means we can actually win though. We'll never win if we keep wedding ourselves. And it's not only that, it's I feel like a moral and energetic stain, like it's not only, internally are they a party of so much racism and oppression? They're a party of war criminals. They prosecuted the war in Iraq. They prosecuted the wars in Afghanistan. And I feel like for us, if we're talking about a movement that's really going to change things, I think it's really important to draw those lines in the sand. So again, I salute you for that decision. That's really exciting.
Yes.
Next, I wanted to talk a bit about public safety. That's kind of on everybody's mind and lips this year with the election. You just released your public safety plan yesterday, so I wanted to ask you a bit about that. And I wanted to start by reading a quote from a piece of your plan. So if you could maybe start by responding to this quote and then tell us about your public safety plan. It says, "Let me be clear. Any system of law enforcement will be unjust if the system it is upholding is unjust. Real equity and democracy cannot happen under our current system of racial capitalism because this system profits off of concentrated power, exploitation, displacement, dispossession, and violence." Could you expound on that?
I think at the core of being a socialist is acknowledging the system of racial capitalism. And racial capitalism in itself is, again, a system where the rich, big business, the capitalist class owns the means of production, owns everything that encaptures your life, from housing, from food, from how your streets look. That is all taken out of the hands of working class people. And to make sure working class people do not, not to prevent it, but to make sure that when working class people gets pissed off about not having power over their lives and their means of having a livelihood, to minimize the continuous frustration that working class people will have and clearly will want to rebel against, you need an enforcement structure. And that's law enforcement. That's the military. And that's apparatus is inherent to a system of racial capitalism. And the racialization piece is the fact that we know capitalism is predicated on exploitative dynamics and divisions between, yes, like the working class people, but specifically around racial lines.
Yeah.
Because you need a continuous source of people that you can pull for free labor at any time, or actually to dispossess from labor itself and reroute it somewhere else to other brown people across the world. So it requires these inherent exploitative and violent dynamics amongst people of color. So as long as that system is intact, and we keep this conversation of public safety to just policing alone, we're gonna always miss the North Star. Like, it has to be, whatever we do about public safety, we have to connect it to a socialist platform that demands concessions and mass investments into our well-being, from housing, from food, from climate. Like, you are not gonna police ourselves out of the crises that capitalism inherently and will continuously generate, that we're seeing every day.
Yeah. I just really appreciate that, and it's really important for us to understand, just like you said, the police play a role in this system. So if you still need an eviction force, if you still need to clear encampments of houseless people, if you still have houseless people, if you still have people who don't have employment, it doesn't matter what you call it police, put a different badge on it, give them a different car, it doesn't matter. The violence is still there. So if we're really talking about abolition, it can be nothing short of revolutionary change, because it really requires changes in the whole political economy. Yes. So with that framework that you're bringing to the conversation, can you just talk a little bit more? What are some of the highlights of your public safety plan? What would you like to do if you get elected?
I think the biggest piece that we want to emphasize is, under this debate that we know corporate forces are going to try to draw the lines of like defunders versus reformists, is basically saying that minimalizing the role of policing as it stands does not mean we are defunding a system of public safety that can work for all of us. And the way that our plan imagines that is everyone deserves a trained professional to show up in the variety of crises we experience on a day-to-day basis. So that means we should be fully funding 311 and 911, but instead of having an armed person come to your doors when you're experiencing substance abuse issues, when you're experiencing a neighbor who might be in distress, because like you said, they got eviction papers served to them. Right. You don't call the police. You can have a housing counselor respond to them. You can have a social worker. You can have a mental health professional, people who are trained to support these type of crises. Another big piece is also rolling back the militarization of our policing system. There's countries all around us that have proven that you don't need armed officers for all cases of crime. Even our own 911 work study group says that 70% of our calls have required unarmed folks to show up. So why are we fully funding just armed cops to walk around to resolve things that are not being resolved? Just more escalation, more violence. And again, another big piece of ours is like investing in prevention, which is also always an afterthought. We always make prevention seem like this is something that we can't do, because it's true. It's something you can't do under a system of racial capitalism. You cannot guarantee everyone public housing and make corporate developers happy. You cannot make sure everyone has an actual livable wage job and not piss off big business. But we're saying in order to actually have public safety, where everyone's, collective well-being is taken care of, we're going to have to prioritize prevention through social investments into those very things.
Hell yeah.
Front center that.
Beautiful. Another distinction that you made reading through your plan, and I think it's an important perspective to kind of bring to all these conversations right now, is the Yes for Minneapolis charter amendment. So on the ballot in November, it'll go to voters. Will vote if they want to change the charter to create a new system of public safety. Can you talk about how the implications of that for your tenure as a city council person? Like, if that passes, what will that mean for your vision for public safety? And if that does not pass, what will that mean for your vision of public safety?
I think what we try to communicate in our plan is, regardless of what happens in November, we have a number of tools to still move forward with making meaningful changes to how we do public safety in a non-traditional sense. And of course, through the charter amendment process, like that gives us additional tools of, like, we don't have to worry about requirements of policing. You get to, figure out ways to create more democratic oversight within this department that doesn't, prioritize the chief of police or the mayor, which typically is usually pressured to support the chief of police and whatever they desire. So we believe, like, of course, that gives us additional tools to move forward with the things that we outlined in our plan. But even regardless if it doesn't happen, we're going to move forward. You can still prioritize fully funding 911 and 311. You can still make sure we're banning militarized practices like, deploying tear gas and military-grade munitions. You can still make those things happen as a city council member by introducing your own charter amendments. Another powerful tool that we have in our discretion is the budget, which again is the biggest piece about that social investment. There is nothing that prevents city council time and time again from making those investments. They have the opportunity to even do it with the flood of American Rescue dollars that we've gotten. And instead of contesting Fry's proposal, which puts a lot of those dollars back into the hands of police, you could have put those hands into working class people. I mean, that money into working class people.
Yeah, that's been frustrating for me, because I understand, that the charter is one front of the struggle, but what I've seen is the city council and the establishment, use the charter as an excuse to not use the power that they have with the budget, So it's like, I think it's great that you're being honest and upfront about, there's a chance the charter amendment might pass. There's a chance it might not pass. The struggle continues either way. Because even if it does pass, that's not a magic pill. That just means the struggle shifts onto different terrain. And a lot of that is still going to have to be defined. So thanks for sharing. The next thing I want to talk about was housing. Our podcast started as the critique of a development, and we talk a lot about housing policy. And I think, obviously, housing is a pillar of the political economy and the pillar of people's lives. So I'm curious, can you talk about your priorities and your vision for housing as a city council person? And what does it mean for you being a socialist? How does that make you different than a capitalist in terms of housing policy?
I think the clearest piece of our biggest priority is expanding public housing and expanding city-owned housing that goes to a 30% AMI. And we say that because right now, much of the conversation around housing is around this notion of affordability. And what we want to highlight is the fact that affordable housing, the whole movement behind it was basically a political front to decimate public housing. And affordable housing, which in an analysis of a socialist, it still places the control, the power of creating housing into corporate developers, into the hands of the capitalist class. It doesn't remove the profit margins. It basically says that the market, this is the only way we can solve this. This is the only tool we can have to produce a clearly, desired need amongst working class people. And that's absolutely false. We have allotment of public housing, foreclosed homes, that the city could be generating their own type of funding through, municipal bonds, like to produce their own housing.
Yes.
And to create democratic structures in that. You could do cooperatives. You could do, which is something that we support, TOPA, the opportunity to purchase. Give your tenants the opportunity to purchase buildings instead of selling them off for $1 to corporate developers.
Yeah.
So expanding space for democratized housing, expanding public housing, figuring out how we can also get back units from the affordable housing market that we basically allowed to explode under the 2040 plan.
Yeah.
And none of those units, as we talked about, have been affordable. Most of them are cost burdened. And we have a lot of these new developments that are just sitting vacant.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's like a crime, to go out into the city. Literally, I leave my house, I walk past multiple encampments of unsheltered people, and then I walk by multiple towers that I know are sitting empty or damn near empty, and I love that aggressive thinking. So not only expanding and protecting the public housing that we have and utilizing the public sector to construct beautiful public housing. That's the other thing I think about is like, we could be building the most beautiful, creative, stylish buildings with the public sector. We could be employing and inspiring young architects of color, architects who come from the hood, who could be building, housing for our new future, our new climate reality. It's all there for us, and the public sector could do that. But back to my point is like, and then the policy that you just mentioned is then actually looking at the buildings that have been built in this boom in these last few years and putting them back in the public market, either buying them as a city or, taking them from developers and putting them to good social use. I think we need to start thinking that way, And as far as like organizers and activists, it's like, I think one of the most inspiring things that happened last year was the occupation of the Sheraton, and just thinking that way as far as like that housing sitting there empty is a crime, and you're a human right to go occupy that housing, So if we have a movement thinking that way, and then representatives such as yourself who are thinking aggressively too, I think we could really do some exciting things in Minneapolis.
To tax them to fund these things. The corporate developers, we've subsidized them. We've given them millions of taxpayer dollars to exasperate our housing prices.
Absolutely.
And they should be paying for that.
Definitely. That brings us to another question. Another piece I've heard from your campaign that I'm excited about is a socialist tax vision, a socialist vision for building public revenue. So could you talk about that a bit? You just mentioned it, but like, how do we raise the money to do these things that you want to do? And as your campaign, have you all found any potential taxes or fees or fines? How are you planning on taking this money from the billionaires and giving it to the people?
Absolutely. I think when we're talking about housing, for sure, one of the things that we're exploring, because this has actually become a new trend in our city, is the Airbnb tax. We literally have developments in Uptown where whole floors of quality, nice housing are sitting empty throughout the year.
I got 2 Airbnbs on my floor.
See? And again, while literally folks are sleeping in tents throughout the year, makes absolutely no sense. We need to be taxing that and creating regulations of, if that's not being used to house people in our own city, we need to be buying that back. Like, that needs to be going back into the market.
Hell yeah.
We've also looked at mansion taxations, so a millionaire tax on homes, essentially, because why are we selling freaking mansions at this time? Like, that should be taxed as well. We've been looking at what does it look to do, like the Seattle model, where they did employee head tax for Amazon, which basically says, you have an expansive number of workers, you are not paying them the wages that they deserve. We're going to enact fees on you to generate more than $240 million of new revenue that will then go to build new housing.
And that's when I heard about the Amazon tax. That's how it actually
Yes.
functioned. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
So same like Target, we have the largest concentration of Fortune 500 companies right here in Minnesota. And over the past pandemic year, we've seen their revenue jump up, like skyrocket, because they're closing down facilities. They're rolling back and laying off masses of workers. And we're not seeing any of that money goes into our communities. And I would love to work with folks to figure out how do we start to tax healthcare facilities, because the health partners of this world have gotten paid. And it's like, you should not enjoy tax exempt status so that you can consolidate more wealth while laying off healthcare workers, while closing down needed healthcare facilities during a freaking pandemic. That's a problem.
Absolutely. I learned over the pandemic, I didn't know that United Health, the largest private insurer in the nation, is headquartered in Minnesota. So there's just so much money out there that, we need to seize back. I got two more questions, if that's cool. This one I wanted to shift gears a little bit, and it's kind of like a twofold question. Mm-hmm. So say you get elected. I want to know, one, how do you expect to deal with like the stress and the strain and the pressure as a human being? You know, are you prepared for that? Is that something that you're thinking about? And then two, I want to know, how are you prepared to relate to the movement? You know, and are you thinking about what dynamics might change now you're, holding state power in this position? Like, how do you plan to operate to maintain like integrity and connection with the movement?
Absolutely. I think those questions are very much tied in so many ways of like what keeps me grounded now is being in community with folks, like making sure I'm not abandoning the Zumba classes that I've done with one of the few Black women in this city, over in North Minneapolis, like making sure I'm showing up to those spaces, making sure and taking care of my health. Yeah. I am fully supportive of therapy.
Hell yeah.
Like, folks, deal with your stuff, talk to people through your trauma, process your trauma, establish you a core support team that's going to not only hold you accountable, but also help keep you grounded. And I think that is one of the key things that we're talking about, like when we get elected. One of the first things that we want to implement is similar to like the Shama Sawant's office. You know, city council gets paid $106,000. It might be a little bit more than that. They've given themselves a couple raises. Wow. And using a portion of our collective salaries to not only fund a community office, because we realize it makes no sense for us as public servants to have our main office be in downtown Minneapolis, where we know lobbyists for corporate developers, banks can have more.
Same building as the jail.
Exactly. Which also the jail, while putting working class people in jail, and literally the jails is right in that same building. Makes absolutely no sense. So we want to fund a community-based office.
Dope.
Hire staff, also be there to help canvas, around the things that we're pushing, because all the programmatic pieces that we're talking about, like universal housing, passing rent control, passing tax on the rich, is going to take struggle. And we know city council members, your office get like 2 people. Yeah. It's taxing. Yeah. And knowing that I cannot lead, nor do I ever imagine I could lead those things on my own, we're going to have to build a movement behind that. And it's reciprocal. Just as we're trying to build a movement to support tax on the rich, I need to still be showing up for our folks in struggle. If that's maintaining that we're going to picket lines when workers are striking, making sure I'm going to do phone banks to call out folks, text banks, like using our public platform to call out and bring attention to these struggles, but also to make sure our constituents are being activated in them. Another thing that we're really excited to do is like when we're in office, like holding a big meeting to build a social contract with our supporters in the movements. I'm a labor organizer, so calling it, we call them MOUs, memorandums of understanding, to outline very clearly what are we going to accomplish together. Like rent control, we're about to work together to pass that. What does that mean? All right, y'all gonna show up to our office to help do like phone bank shifts, door knock shifts, so that we can make sure all of our neighbors are gonna be activated and fighting for the strongest policy. Hell yeah. So I think those are some of the things to like keep us grounded and rooted in working class community, in struggle, because that's what it's going to take. Retreat is when you fall back into a practice of liberalism.
Yeah.
And that has served nobody.
I love it. I love the idea of having a field office like that and continuing to organize. And I think that's a great demonstration of the difference between a socialist and a liberal, is like not making big promises on the campaign thinking that you can do it by yourself, but knowing that you're a tool in the struggle when you get in there and organizing for it. And I think it shows how pitiful this last city council was. They didn't even say rent control till this year, you know, and anybody... A lot of people were thinking about rent control 4 years ago.
Yes.
They didn't organize for it when in there. They didn't advocate for it. They're not organized. You know, they're not proposing bold cuts to the MPD budget or reinvestment and then organizing behind it. They're acting like liberals. You know what I'm saying? And that's like, we need a real distinct change. All right. Here's my last question is, could you kind of give listeners a sketch of Ward 2? Like, what are the boundaries, people who can vote for you? And then what are some things in Ward 2 that you love? Like, what do you love about Ward 2? Maybe some spots we might want to hit up, or, you know, you don't have to incriminate yourself.
No, it's
I want to know all the best weed-smoking locations in each ward.
And Lord have mercy.
Ward 2, it's definitely, River Road is Ward 2. You can smoke all through Road 2 and have a great time.
To East Parkway. So if you are in Cooper, Longfellow, Seward, Cedar Riverside,
okay, Cedar Riverside.
Yes, so we have in the boundary for that, where that stops, it goes right up to like Augsburg. Augsburg is also part of that. Como. So we have a huge student community and population in our ward.
Okay.
So if you are in those neighborhoods, you can vote for us. And it's a pretty diverse, like working class. Majority of folks make less than 50,000. I think it's like 50%. More than 50% are renters. Again, very much student oriented. More than 60% of folks are under the age of 34.
Wow.
So I love when people are like, "Why are you running against Cam?" And it's like I reflect the changes of our community.
Yeah.
Like, no. And then best spots. This is interesting. I laugh because like social life, even though it's so young, it's very interesting in Ward 2. I would definitely say Memory Lanes. We got like a really popping. I mean, we're having our concert there, so I'm gonna shout them out this Saturday. Shifa, when you really want some good food, I don't know if you've ever been to Gadi Mahal, but the former chef from there united with an East African chef. And their food is amazing.
Where is that, Shifa?
Shifa is right off of 37th and Lake Street.
Okay, nice. Now I got a new spot.
It's so good. They got a curry mango dish that's so good. I'm a big eater, so I like good food. We have tons of good food. We have peppers and fries. We have good coffee, milkweed, not weed. But they actually have CBD-infused coffee beverages.
Nice.
I would say, like, we have beautiful parks. So if you want to go and enjoy nature while you inhale nature, it's a really good space along with East Parkway where you get to see the Mississippi River, a good walk while you also are inhaling the trees around.
There you go. Beautiful. Anything else you want to share with our listeners, and how can folks support you?
Absolutely. Like, first off, check out Robin from Minneapolis on our social media to see how you can join us for our upcoming door knocks. We have 10,000 doors to knock by November 2nd. And literally it's going to be our ground game that's going to be the winning factor in this race, and making sure that our students, the communities that have not been activated in this race in prior years, like knowing you actually have the opportunity with this election to like drastically shift the future of our city. Because right now, I think many of us can agree it's divided amongst like political orientations and visions, where, the Jacob Fries and the moderates are completely fine with corporate developers and big business and upscale condos. Like, that's the vision that they want. And the rest of us are like, no, we want to build a city that actually works for working class people.
Hell yeah.
And so by supporting us, that means supporting rent control. That means supporting a new Department of Public Safety, things that actually works in the collective interest and allow us to fight for a different future. So this election, I know we say that about I feel like it's so historic because there are so many things that if they happen here, like around public safety, it literally shapes the debates of how we deal with public safety across the country, especially as the epicenter of one of the most largest uprisings that will yield a global uprising in the wake of George Floyd. There is so much that is riding on what happens here in Minneapolis. And I think it's amazing that ordinary people get to decide and have a stake in that fight, in that future. So if you want to have a socialist representing you and fighting for a Minneapolis that works for working class people, like, continue to follow us on social media, donate, come to our events, amplify our campaign, help us meet people, working class people, regular people, and get them hyped. I think it's going to be a hype election.
Hell yeah. Hey, there you go. Thank you so much for joining us. Robin for Minneapolis, money, power, land, solidarity.
We need money, land, solidarity. If you funny, stand very far away from me. We have running plans about as far as they can see to keep them coming.